Hello, everybody, and a very happy Best of Pedalshift to you. I am currently out on the road on a really exciting bicycle tour. I can't tell you how ready I've been to get on the road. So this is the beginning, this Best of, and the next couple of weeks are in the can episodes that I had prepared, worked extra hard to get prepared for you while I'm out on tour. On this episode, we go all the way back to the very first anniversary show that I ever had for the Pedalshift project. This was originally podcast on June 11th, 2015. It is the Pedalshift project episode 022, the 22nd edition. And we're going to be featuring the portion of the show that was surrounding the book Spandex Optional Bicycle Touring and the interview with Peter Rice. It's one of my favorite interviews that I've had in the early days. I think I say this for all of the interviews, but this was really fun because I think that the best part about Peter's point of view is you don't need any kind of special gear and you don't need anything. You don't need to have any excuses. Just get out there and ride. And that's what I really, really enjoyed about this interview. So I do an intro for him and everything. I actually, by 1 year in, I managed to get this whole podcast thing down for the bike touring side of things. So I am just going to pitch it to me all the way back in 2015. Hey, we've got an interview. It's the Pedalshift Book Club. You didn't know we had a book club? We've got a book club. We totally have a book club. It's just one book so far, but it's a book club. We officially have one. Spandex Optional Bicycle Touring is the title. It is a fantastic read. I listened to it while I was on the DC to Pittsburgh ride. I talk about that in the interview, so I don't want to spoil that too much. Peter Rice is a writer, author, marketer, and consultant living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was born and raised in Washington State and earned a BA from Colorado College and spent several years doing time in print journalism, including a stint for the now defunct Albuquerque Tribune. I think you're going to really like this interview, and we're just going to jump right into it. Hello, Peter, and welcome to Pedalshift.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk to you about your book because I think that you have a unique voice, and I think it fits the vibe of this show, and I think a lot of the listeners as well. And it's called Spandex Optional Bicycle Touring, How to Ride Long Distance the Cheap and Easy Way. And I had the opportunity to read it, if you can read an audiobook, while I was bike touring. So I had this great meta experience during all of it. I thought that was kind of fun. And I'd encourage people, if they're interested in this book after this interview, that might be a good way to do it as well, with one earbud in, or two if you're like me and you ignore all convention and safety.
Absolutely. No, you can read an audiobook, and I think the popularity of audiobooks is exploding just along with the popularity of bicycling and bicycle touring. So who knows, maybe there's a huge connection there that we're missing.
Totally. Yeah. And I also appreciated that you were the reader of it as well, which I thought was good because I thought, A, you did a great job, and B, I always appreciate it when authors do their own readings because you know the inflection points, you know how you were hearing the written word in your head as you were writing it. So your performance is going to reflect that. So I thought that was very cool as well.
Well, it's also the cheap and easy way to do an audiobook. So that had something to do with that, I'm sure.
This is true. These are all true things. I want to start off with how you open the book. You know, an honest to God manifesto. And I'm just going to pull it out because I think there were two parts of it that I thought that really resonated with me. And so I'm going to read it for you, to you, of your own words. So
fire away.
Let me be clear. I am no Superman, no candidate for an Under Armour commercial. I could stand to lose 20 pounds. I hate running. Hiking bores me to death. I know I should do yoga, but I don't. I am not a member of a gym. I generally don't buy organic food. I do not recall ever drinking a protein shake, though Tang really does hit the spot sometimes. So that's part one. And the other one is when you speak about how other people view bicycle tourists. I say all of this because bicycle tourists are often looked on by others as minor gods. The sheer distances involved, the outrageous costumes, the unexplored questions about where exactly one sleeps. People look at this and somehow think that they are not worthy. Those two things in the opening of the book, I think really spoke to what bicycle touring experience is for me, at least, that I agree. I am equally no Superman. And I'm also, you contrast that with what people look at, friends, family, even strangers, when you say, oh yeah, well, I just biked down the Pacific Coast, or I just biked from DC to Pittsburgh even. it's just shocking, people's reactions to those juxtapositions. I don't feel like I'm some Olympic level athlete, yet people act and treat me as such, which is kind of crazy. Does this continue to surprise you from when you started to where you are now?
I guess it doesn't completely surprise me, because I think we probably encourage some of this as bicycle tourists, perhaps unwittingly. I mean, we all sort of want to feel like we're a badass, and so we may overplay our hand in terms of, I just biked this outrageous distance. I slept on the ground, and I ate food out of convenience stores, and I had to do all these other outrageous things. And we say this, and maybe we're not really quick to say, but really it's a lot easier than it looks, and you can do it too, and here's how you can get started. And one of the ideas with the book here was to sort of pull back that veil and say, look, this is it's not nearly as difficult as it seems. It's not as intimidating as it seems. There's some admittedly intimidating psychological aspects to this. You've got these foreign situations, very long distances, things like that. But really, this, the spandex, the super athlete, you don't need to be a mechanical genius. You don't need to be rich. This is something normal people on normal bikes can do as part of a normal life or a normal weekend.
And I think that's what makes it so popular. I think, especially, once you sort of get the bug, that's a thing that just really resonates, that all of a sudden you're doing something that is really measurable. I mean, I always like that I can take a look at a map and say, I biked from here to there. And this is like, not some local map. This is, a state map or a map of the country. There's something that's really exciting about that. And when I talk to people about bike touring, that is something that really resonates for them as well. Do you see that also in your conversations with others?
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the conversations are the sort of jaw-dropping, I can't believe you did that variety. But then there are a number of people who say to themselves, I've always wanted to do something like that, or I think I could do something like that. And that's your in. At that point, then you start making the sales pitch here. And I know you and your podcast, I'm preaching to the choir a little bit about this. So maybe this is just useful as talking points to get more of our friends to do this sort of thing. But there really is kind of a gateway drug that you can suggest for them. I mean, don't suggest they go on a 2-week trip 1,000 miles away at first. No, just pitch an overnight trip in the next town over or something like that. I'm in Albuquerque right now. Go to Santa Fe. That's not very far away. It's familiar. Just do something easy that can help you get the bug. And if you like it, great. Then start planning your trip down the Oregon coast or something like that.
What was the thing that got you started? You talked about it a bit in the book, but what got you into this?
I think it's an old hackneyed stereotypical story. I was working a corporate job I didn't very much like. I was a reporter, and it was sort of working at a newspaper that was very much going down the tubes. So I got tired of it and decided to do something outrageous. And so then the first bike tour down the Oregon coast, in fact, was born. Although I come from a fairly outrageous family. We never had a car growing up, and so we biked everywhere. So this was really not as big a barrier to entry to me as it is for a lot of other people.
I have found that, and you talk about this a little bit too, that one of the big barriers that once you do get into it is hills. Why do you think hills terrify so many people? They seem to be something that a newbie will loathe. And then eventually, once you become a sort of a grizzled veteran, that it's something that you sort of slowly start to accept. And then some people just are like, I love climbing. And seeing that flow, that movement over time. Do you notice that as well? And what is it about hills that you think are this thing for people in bike touring?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And one of the funny parts about this is, so I set out to write this book that's a how-to on bicycle touring, which is this sort of mechanical, physical craft. And you'd think it would be something like an engineering problem. Okay, you do X, Y, and Z, and then you're a bicycle tourist. Not at all. This is an exercise in psychology. And hills are a big part of that. And what's really interesting to watch is people, at first, they're afraid of hills. And then once they get out there, they realize that hills are not your main enemy. Wind is your main enemy. or at least can be, I guess, depending on the size of the hill. But hills, I think are really tough because you're just accomplishing so little in so long a time, and you're working really hard, and you're just not achieving that sort of distance, and it's just not exciting. And it's a real acquired taste to get to the point where you can just kind of grind it out and be okay with going really slow. And, maybe some of these crazy hills, especially out here in the West, you could be on that for 3 hours. I experienced one hill like that in Idaho where I was listening to some dumb country station, and the song came on the radio. I forget what it was, but 2 hours later, I'm still on the same hill, and the same song comes on the radio again. I mean, it's just, you have to get to that point where you can be okay with that. But hills are just, you're right though. It's another barrier to entry, and I would recommend for people's first ride, just don't even bother with hills, or see if you can arrange it where you've got a net elevation decrease. So, I know this is a New Mexico centric perspective, but go from Santa Fe to Albuquerque instead of Albuquerque to Santa Fe, you'll lose 2,000 feet. But that's, hills are just a tough situation. You just have to grin and bear it. But for you newbies out there and for you experienced bicycle tourists, tell your friends, don't worry about hills for the first couple of trips. Just plan the route around them.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip. Because also, especially when you're starting off with a bike that maybe is just the one that you have in your garage, and you talk about this, and I've talked about this on the show and on the website a lot, start with what you've got. And sometimes those bikes just aren't geared appropriately for really, really tall hills. And that was something that I discovered on my very first major bike tour out west. I was doing a portion of the Pacific Coast route, and I was going up and over Leggett Hill, and I was on a bike that was really great for road biking, and it was just it was built more for speed essentially than it was for climbing. And, I was really pressing into the pedals. I'm in my lowest gear and everybody else is zooming up, and I'm thinking to myself, I've been training all summer. I've been riding. I've been commuting. I've been doing everything. Why is this happening to me? I must suck at this. And then you start to realize, no, physics. And that's just something that you learn as well. And one other thing that I wanted to throw in there, because you mentioned wind, and I don't know if he invented this, but I always attribute it to him because he's the first one that I heard it from. Brock Dittus over at the Sprocket podcast over in Portland, Oregon. He always refers to wind as invisible hills. And I always think that that's completely true, because a proper headwind on you is going to slow you down in a way just like a hill will, and it can have the same kind of psychological impact on you. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Absolutely.
One of the other things that you talked about in the book I thought really resonated with me was you had this really, I felt, spot on description of the different categories of people who tour by bike. And, you can talk about them here right now if you'd like, but I was curious if you've seen those categories sort of ebb and flow over the years.
That's a hard one to know, especially since the last couple of years, I've either toured on routes that are not really conventional routes, like the route from Albuquerque to Oklahoma is not, and this was before the Adventure Cycling Association published their Route 66 guide, so not a lot of my fellow bike tourists on there. And then I've been doing a lot of short hops around New Mexico, so I think I probably don't have enough to go on in terms of the perspective there, but sort of broadly demographically speaking, I would guess that the amount of retirees who are taking this up is increasing. And that's just because the old stereotypes saw about the baby boomers wanting to live forever. They're all retired now, and they're looking to do maybe not extreme sports, but a little more extreme than golf. And I've heard at least one pundit refer to bicycle touring as the new golf with that set.
Oh, good Lord, that scares me greatly.
No, it's good. I mean, imagine the paradise we'd have if everyone was doing it.
Yeah. And
at the same time, we're seeing with the younger generation, we're seeing a lot of situations where in previous generations, you'd sort of either graduate from high school or graduate from college and then immediately enter the workforce. Now we've got this sort of extended period of time where you're not necessarily committed to any one thing. And the more time people spend under the age of, say, 30, in career commitments that can be measured in months rather than years. The more time people of that demographic spend sort of bouncing around between jobs, the better for bicycle touring, because a lot of people in that generation seem to tour whenever they've got a gap of some kind in whatever else they're doing in their life. So the more of those gaps, the more tours I think will happen.
Yeah, I always feel like that firmly in the Gen X category. So, like low 40s. I'm certainly not retired. I'm definitely not fitting one of the other categories you talk about, these sort of the recently graduated types. And it's interesting because I always feel like I don't identify with the retired folks, even though I got a little gray in the beard, but I definitely don't feel like I'm sort of embarking on this new phase of my life, or I'm taking a break in between phases of my life. So that I've always thought that was kind of interesting, that I don't neatly fit into some of the categories. And of course, you've got a category that is the rest of us, and I think the wild cards, I think it was.
Yes, we planned on you.
Yeah, exactly. When I first started, I found that in my sort of N=1 experience, just my own, that it felt like it was an incredibly non-diverse kind of representation of the world. It felt like it was very white and very male. But in recent years, it seems like it's diversifying at a pretty good clip. Now, that just could be what I'm noticing, but I'm just curious. I always like asking other people what they feel like in terms of just the diversity of what's out there. I mean, I've met some amazing women out there. I've met some people of color who are out there. It's feeling like it's getting less male and less white, which I think is a good thing. And I was just curious what your experience was.
It does in my experience tend to be predominantly white, predominantly male. If it's female, it's predominantly white female from my experience. And also I write about this a bit in the book. Women tend not to travel alone, although they're more likely to do it in groups. I think it's probably hard to tease out the exact factor. It wouldn't surprise me if it's getting more diverse, simply because biking is getting to be more popular, and that is the sort of first step towards bicycle touring. And at the same time, America's getting more diverse, so I think that's probably pushing that in a good direction as well. But I really do hope as bicycling in general and bicycle commuting becomes more and more popular, and you've seen this with the millennials, by the way, they are less of a driving class than other generations are. As that starts to happen, I think more and more diverse groups of people will get pushed into this, especially if we are successful in removing some of these mental barriers to entry. This idea that you have to be rich or a mechanical genius or something like that. Then we can get people, who work quite a bit and who maybe just have a couple days here and there on the weekends or something like that, and don't have the time or the money to invest in being some super athlete, that they will also get into this sport we know and love.
I definitely want to get into the whole you don't have to be a mechanical genius thing, because you have some really cool stuff in the book that I want to touch on in a little bit. But before I get there, I want to talk about one more quote that I'm going to read at you.
Fire away.
In normal life, we eat. On bike trips, we feed. And I think that is so damn true. Food as fuel is a huge paradigm shift for some people, and particularly bike tourists, because it is, I think you said it exactly right. We feed. Can a good tour, in your opinion, be ruined with bad food, or is there just no such thing when you're on tour?
Not if you're hungry enough. I mean, I've eaten some really, really bad food on tour and just enjoyed the hell out of it. But that really, as I was pointing out there, that's really one of the benefits of touring. I've been joking that instead of Spandex Optional Bicycle Touring, the title should have been something along the lines of "How to Lose Weight by Eating 8,000 Calories a Day."
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no. If we could just work sex in there somehow, it would be even better seller. But it is amazing how much you eat on tour. And this is if you're going, say, more than 40 or 50 miles a day. If you're doing a more relaxed tour, you might not be able to just have a quick snack of a pint and a half of ice cream or something like that. But yeah, you can eat a ton, and that really is one of the highlights of the tour. Now, in some situations, you will get into some scenario where all you've got is a poorly stocked convenience store, and you end up having a dinner consisting of cold Chef Boyardee ravioli. And, that sounds really bad right here, since we're both in houses in normal life, but on tour, that's just a great delicacy worthy of James Beard and Julia Child.
Exactly. I have had that cold can of Chef Boyardee before in my life. I used to rock the beef ravioli, as I recall. That was my jam.
Classic.
This past trip, my shame eating was a Hostess apple pie smothered in peanut butter. That was my shame eating.
Oh, nice.
I documented that. I was like, I need to make sure that people know what happens to you on tour. So yeah, I want to talk about some of the tips that you have in the book, because I think that there's such great collective wisdom out there by everybody who tours, and I balance that with another thing that you say, which is there's no one way to do it, and it's good to listen to people and maybe take the tips and tricks that are out there, but make it your own. So if these tips resonate with people, awesome, and if they don't follow them. Is sort of how I take it from your book and how I think this podcast is all about. So, anyways. Yeah, tip number 1. What is the absolute minimum you should be prepared to fix? And you can even talk about this in the context of your favorite bike mechanic there in Albuquerque.
Yeah, what is the absolute minimum? And this is a good question, because I don't like working on my bike that much. It's just sort of the necessary thing I have to do in order to ride my bike occasionally. And So I went to my mechanic, who's this Jerry Beaupre, this local guy in Albuquerque. He's absolutely obsessed with bikes and loves touring, although has a completely different style of touring than I do. And I said, what is the absolute minimum I can get away with and still consider myself a quasi-responsible bike tourist? And, I don't have the list in front of me, but I think it was just patch and replace tubes and tires, fix a broken chain. What am I forgetting here? Replace cables and spokes. Yeah,
that was it.
Replace spokes. So I learned how to do all of that except the cables and the spokes. And somehow I've pulled off probably 5,000 miles of tour and have lived to tell about it.
Yeah, I think the cables would be tough. I know how to do it, but I would probably never try to do that kind of a fix on the road. But I thought that all the other ones were really spot on.
Well, when you ride the sort of bikes more when you ride the sort of bikes I have ridden in the past, you do have the occasional experience where you pull on the brake lever and it just snaps and that's it. So the cables might be a good idea in that circumstance. But no, if you're a normal, responsible bicyclist, and you certainly sound like it, you could probably get away with not having the cables, and you could always like jury rig something and probably get to the next town if your trip depended on it. So yeah, it's amazing how little you need to actually know about mechanics in order to ride a bike for a long distance. But this is another interesting psychological quandary. People are sort of afraid that their bike is going to break down. But they're not really as afraid that their car will break down. I mean, they'll happily drive for a long distance out in the middle of nowhere, and if something happens, you just call AAA or call the tow truck, and that's life. But somehow that doesn't really translate to bike travel. And one of the messages that I hope gets out is, you need to worry about breaking down on the road only so much as it is helpful. And it's really not helpful to obsess about it. Just make sure your bike is in reasonably good condition and get out there and maybe have a tentative plan B, and you'll probably be fine.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think that you can do a lot of things to be able to roll to the next town or get yourself to the next town. And I think you even mentioned this in the book, just sort of figure out a way to hitchhike into the next town and figure it out from there. It's not necessary to be able to pull off your bottom bracket and be able to do all these things. And you may not even know what the heck a bottom bracket is when you first get started.
I barely know what a bottom bracket is right now.
I know where it is. I know it's somewhere around the pedals, right? But I got more intellectually curious just about the mechanics of a bicycle once I got more into touring, and learned all the things that I used to do when I was a kid, like spray WD-40 on my chain, that how horrible of an idea that was, and things like that. It's really interesting because at its heart, it's a machine, but it's a simple machine, and you can really do a few things to your knowledge base that will make your bike tour that much better, because you can handle one of the things that's sort of in the 75th to 90th percentile of possibilities of things of happening to you, like getting a flat. So I agreed with that. I think that it maybe shamed me a little bit into learning more about the cables. So maybe I'll do that.
Well, you never know. These things are controversial. But again, even though Jerry gave me this advice, learn how to replace cables, I didn't take it, and here I am.
I'd rather pay Jerry to do it myself, actually, or than do it myself.
Absolutely.
I'll find Jerry next time I'm in Albuquerque. One of the other tips that I really loved was lubing your chain at the gas station.
Yeah, that's another dirtbag trick from Jerry. So you can get, and this is an insight into Jerry's personality, I think. You can bring along a little chain lube, especially if you're likely to hit some rain or something, or if it's a longer tour, you might need something like that. But he would call this the coward's way out, especially considering that at basically every gas station and auto shop in this great land of ours, there is a dumpster, and in that dumpster, there is a bottle of something that can be used as chain lube. Now, I know there's some controversy as to whether motor oil can be used as chain lube, but I'll say this much: I've put it on my chain on my bike. That is my pride and joy, and live to tell about it. So yeah, you can just root around in the dumpster, and that saves you the weight of carrying lube with you, and maybe also makes you feel like a badass. Who knows?
I loved how he called carrying the your own bottle with you the coward's way out. That was just amazing. I loved it. He had one more thing. I guess he resonated with me quite a bit.
Jerry's awesome.
He seems like it. I think he would be a pretty amazing guy to chat with. The system regarding tires.
Yes.
Because I am a coward, and I ride and will only ride with Schwalbe marathons because they are freaking bulletproof. I believe you said that you didn't talk about Schwalbe's in particular, but you said something about you could roll over an IED and not get a flat with something like that. Agreed. But I was really interested in Jerry's The System.
Yeah, the system is great. I don't think Jerry invented it, but he may have dubbed it the system. In fact, I'm pretty sure he got it from somebody else here, and it's also so intuitive that it's quite possible that it's been invented independently at various places. And I should also say, by way of disclaimer, if this sort of a dirtbag solution just makes you cringe, then definitely go with those bulletproof tires, and you will probably just not have to worry about anything for your whole trip. But if you have less than stellar tires, or if you're a cheapskate or something like that, like me, what you do is you take an old tire and you cut the bead off, which is the little tense metal wire that kind of gives it shape. And that's sort of if you lay the tire flat, think of the first 1/8 inch or so, just cut that off. So you have this thing that looks like a tire, but it's really flexible, and it doesn't sort of stand like a tire. And what you do is you stuff that tire into the tire that you're actually using, and it effectively acts as a really good liner / second auxiliary tire almost. Now the advantages of that are you just got yourself the best tire liner available, and you did it basically for free. The other advantage is that the outer tire can be a complete piece of crap. And you can ride it for a long time without having any problems. Some of these tires I've rolled, there were literally holes in the outer tire that you could see, but then right in there was the inner tire, so it was all good. So it does add a little bit of weight to the situation, but if you're looking for reasonably bulletproof performance in the cheaper tires, that's probably your best bet.
I thought this was a genius thing, especially for anybody who's listening who's thinking about doing some real global traveling, because I feel like that your ability to get really high-end tires, if that's what you usually roll on, may decrease in some of the countries that Schwalbe maybe not have an offering, your Thailands and whatnot, perhaps. But your ability to get two tires, one a little bit bigger, one the right size and one a little bit smaller, I feel like you can do that just about any place in the world. So I thought that was a really intriguing way to go about it, and kind of the most badass tire liner ever, like you said.
Well, thank you on behalf of Jerry and whoever invented that.
The system. I love it. And I shall refer to it forever as the system. Want to talk a little bit about wild camping, because that's, there's so many different ways to tour. And you talk about it in the book about, everywhere from sort of credit card touring with B&Bs and hotels on one end of the extreme, all the way to sort of wild camping with and without permission. And it sounded like that it was a comfort level thing for you, that you sort of drew the line at sort of the non-permission based wild camping. And I was curious, is that an accurate description of sort of your feel on it? And, what's sort of your take on wild camping generally?
I'm okay with it. I think the world of bicycle touring is too small for us to have little civil wars about the best type of camping. But I will just go ahead and say that I don't like it. I've been sort of forced to do it a couple of times just because of the circumstances of the particular tour and poor planning on my part. But in general, I like me a shower at the end of the day, and a picnic table is pretty darn nice too. The second this book goes on the New York Times bestseller list, I will probably just stay in hotels the whole time. I gotta be honest about that. But I think in terms of camping, I think my favorite happy medium is RV parks. They're almost uniformly very nice. They've got all kinds of great facilities, and they're full of elderly Republicans who don't want to steal your stuff and are really friendly.
And often Wi-Fi.
And Wi-Fi these days, yeah. So that's another advantage. But I think wild camping, if I were to do it, I would probably err on the side of getting permission. But the disadvantages are pretty obvious in that it's potentially very difficult to find services. It's time consuming to find the actual campsite. You could run into a town at 4:00 in the afternoon and there's just no option available, and you have to spend another couple hours finding an actual place or poaching some site somewhere. So it probably just doesn't mesh with my particular personality and how I want to spend my day. But so I'm happy to spend $15-20 on an RV park, but to each their own.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it has to be with the focus, for bike touring, for the people who do camping. There's a lot of people who are like, the bike is the conveyance to get them to the next campsite. And this is more about a camping thing, as opposed to a lot of people who it's more about the actual riding itself. And so they'd rather have the comforts at the end of the day. And there's all sorts of shades of gray in between. And I think there's no one right way at all. And I totally celebrate all the different ways of doing it. And I've run into a lot of people who really love the aspect of wild camping. I interviewed a guy named Nathan Clevenger who's kind of working his way across country, and he's a big proponent of wild camping. He's kind of got the simple living kind of motif to it. And when I talk to him about camping and campgrounds and places where you'd be paying, if I said, oh, well, it was $10 a night, he'd be like, I can't believe they charge $10 for sleeping on the ground. And I always just thought that was an interesting way of putting it. But, then it does get into that sort of value proposition, because I've stayed in a bunch of RV parks where, $20 or something like that a night. And I'm just sitting there going, well, let's see, I can get a cheap hotel for $50. So do I want to sleep on the ground for $20, or do I want to find a cheap hotel for $50? It's like, it's all this sort of like arbitrage stuff that's going on in your head, and everyone's got their own sort of place. What's sort of their normal range of comfort, and then what are they feeling in that exact moment? Because there are times when I'm sort of like, I need a shower and I need a place close to a place with beer, and I will pay a premium for that.
Absolutely. My hat's off to all of those people who can pull that off. I mentioned this guy I met in northern New Mexico in the book, where he just rolled in like totally scraggly, possibly not altogether upstairs. He had this trailer with a Rubbermaid tub lashed to it, and on top of that was a solar panel from the 80s that he'd roped to the top of the Rubbermaid tub. And so he just, poach a campsite somewhere every night and watch DVDs on this battery that his solar panel was charging. I mean, I love that in theory, right? The same way I sort of love the idea of traveling across the country on a Greyhound bus. It's just this romantic ideal or something like that. But in practice, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it to that guy and not do it myself.
Totally. I think all of us carry one or two or maybe three things that are just stupid weight. But it's stupid weight for things that we really want and like. And, that's sort of an extreme example right there. I love it.
And the fact that the solar panel, by the way, I used to work in the solar business. We don't rope solar panels to anything. So I was all the more impressed that he pulled it off that way.
Aside from this book, a Spandex Optional Bicycle Touring, you're getting involved in some other sort of entrepreneurial things as well. And I wanted you to give a little bit of an overview of what you're doing and sort of maybe your plans there in New Mexico. You're talking about maybe doing some stuff regarding some additional books and some other touring opportunities. Talk a little bit about what your kind of future is in the bike touring space.
Sure. Well, besides this book, which is general how-to, I'm working on a trilogy of New Mexico specific routes. There are a lot of great routes in New Mexico that are just a few days long, just a few hundred miles, things like that. The scenery is beautiful and the weather is damn near perfect most of the time. Not much rain to worry about. Just bring plenty of water, and you'll be fine. So it's called the Bike Tour New Mexico series at biketournewmexico.com. 2 of the 3 route guides are already out, although I haven't really started an aggressive marketing effort on them. I'll hold off until the 3rd is out. But so the books, and if somebody looks at that book and thinks, hey, I would like a little bit of professional consultation on that, I am more than happy to walk you through what it's like to go on tour in New Mexico for a low competitive price. There's a lot of people who will do organized tours, and I have nothing against organized tours with groups of people, although I don't do them myself. I think what I'm going for more is somebody who wants just a little bit more than a route guide, wants to talk to a human who can make some recommendations about where to stay in a particular place, or kind of give them a little bit more advice without having to spring for a group tour.
Totally. I've done group tours as well myself. And in fact, I did it with a group called Climate Ride, which I always encourage people to do if they want to throw in a little activism with their bike touring. But I found it to be very claustrophobic, for lack of a better term, that you have to leave at a certain time, you have to get to a certain place, and there's just all these prescribed things. And yes, it was nice to be able to ride unloaded, but the fact that my day was absolutely prescribed by someone else, that kind of took a little bit away from the freedom of bike touring for me. And that's what it means to me. But I also don't begrudge anyone from getting involved in organized touring, especially if that's just the comfort level. I mean, having the sag wagon and having the repair guys and gals out there to help them out. Oh, what a difference that could make for a lot of people and remove a barrier to entry. So,
but if we're talking about like the hero archetype you want to see yourself as, and solo touring, self-supported, that's like Luke Skywalker, but going on tour is...
I always preferred Han Solo myself.
Well, so. Han Solo, yeah, okay. Han Solo versus, the stormtrooper in the army or something like that. So, but, whatever floats your boat there.
Oh, God, we could do an entire podcast on Star Wars analogies to bike touring. I'm positive of that.
I would look forward to doing that, Tim, anytime you want to.
Maybe I'll have you back on the show and we'll make that happen. But until then, Peter, you've already told us about biketournewmexico.com. How else can we follow you or get in touch with you?
You can check out peterbryce.com. That has all my various and sundry books. Later this year, I'll even have one about Sri Lankan curries. So it's a pretty eclectic mix to supplement my day job of doing PR. So yeah, feel free to email me through peterbryce.com. And there's my Twitter feed is also posted on biketournewmexico.com, but it's at biketournewmexico.
Awesome. Peter Rice, author of Spandex Optional Bicycle Touring, How to Ride Long Distance the Cheap and Easy Way. Thank you so much for being a part of Pedalshift.
You are most welcome, and look forward to that Star Wars episode.
So I really want to thank Peter for joining us here on Pedalshift. What a great time. I'm looking forward to the Star Wars follow-up interview. We'll figure out how to make that all work. Reminder, please feel free to check out Peter over at peterberace.com or at biketournewmexico.com. Also, if you wanted to get a little bit more from Peter, he also did an interview over on the Sprocket podcast, and that was episode number 240B. That was within the last week or so. Not a ton of overlap, a lot more information from him on sort of his background and things like that. So listen to that if you are not a regular listener of the Sprocket podcast. A, start there and listen to Peter, and B, subscribe to it because it's a great show. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net. Lots of great content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his debut album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Habitat, wherever cool music is available.